Title IX was perhaps one of the biggest issues that brought voters to the poll last year. Now, what is that? Well, that was the issue of the Biden administration's woke agenda that was being pushed on schools, in particular women's sports, that men could compete in women's sports and when men could declare themselves women. Thankfully, sanity and common sense has returned to the White House. Now, you may have seen this exchange with President Trump and the governor of Maine, Janet Mills. I want to play clip number 5, please.
Are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So you better comply because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding.
See you in court.
Every state, good. I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one.
You got to love it. All right. So the president signed an executive order, one of the first, saying that, only women can be in women's sports. And now he's saying to the states that, hey, if you don't comply, you don't get any federal money. And there are various ways the Trump administration can enforce the original meaning of Title IX. And here to talk about this, White House Deputy Assistant to the President and Senior Policy Strategist, Mailman. May, welcome to Washington Watch. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right, I have to say I got a kick out of that exchange with the president, not backing down one bit. But what the bigger news is the next day, we already saw the administration moving, the USDA announcing a review of the University of Maine's transgender sports policy. Talk about how the tools, if you will, that are in the toolbox that the White House can use to make sure that these states comply with federal law.
Yeah, and these are, as you said, this is federal law. These are Congress's tools. Congress, in passing Title IX in 1972, said, hey, states, we're going to give you a bunch of money for your education programs, but it comes with a catch. It's a pretty easy catch. You can't discriminate on the basis of sex. And schools signed up for that. All right, I'll take this money, but I'm not going to discriminate on the basis of sex. But if you are not providing women private locker rooms, if you are not allowing women fair or safe competition, then you're discriminating against women. And so that's what USDA, the Health and Human Services Department, and the Education Department have all now launched investigations into Maine saying, we're going to take away your funding, your education funding, and from these 3 agencies. There are other agencies that give money, and there are other pockets of funds that are at risk. But just these 3 right now, Maine can very easily say, you know what, I'm not going to have men win women's pole vaulting competitions, and that would be the end of that. But Maine seems like they have no interest in doing that.
All right, May, so help us kind of see the connection. People are saying USDA, what does that have to do with the University of Maine? Explain how that funding from USDA goes to the University of Maine.
Yeah, so the University of Maine, also K through 12 schools, take a lot of money from the federal government. So USDA funding can go toward research grants, things like vet programs, different farming majors, other sorts of aid programs. So all of this is going to look in a lot of different ways. I think there's around $100 million that they've identified in this first tranche, and it spans the gamut. Obviously, USDA gives a lot of other money to K through 12 schools, but really we're just talking about higher education. We're talking about the University of Maine. And so these are going to be things like research grants.
Do you anticipate other federal agencies stepping in to add a little more pressure until the university or till the governor of Maine cries uncle?
Well, I do. Of course, I always try and be hopeful because it's funny. If you think about this as a normal person, this is one of those things that if the governor of Maine had an open heart at all, she would see how easy it is just to protect women's sports. And the only reason that she is declining the money in this way is because she so hates President Trump. I mean, this is something that's just rooted in hate and lack of logic. And so what I hope is that the people of Maine actually go and talk to their governor and say, we don't want men in women's sports. That's not what they want. This is an 80-20 issue. Even Democrats, even most Democrats, do not want men in women's sports. And so while, yes, the White House is prepared to do other agencies, to do these same agencies, more pots of funding, absolutely. What I hope is that the governor of Maine starts caring about her own people and the women in her state.
Yeah, this is kind of crazy. This is not a hill to compete on. As you said, this is an 80-20 issue. Most people realize we should not have men in women's sports and in women's locker rooms. It's, by the way, I just, again, just thought the president was great on this. It's good to see him standing and firmly stating these positions and not backing down. And thankful that he has now an administration that is backing him up on all of this. So grateful, May, for you joining us today, and appreciate your insight on this.
Thank you.